So this is going to give you more practice. You're going to create quite a few variables in this one. Just create and initialize the following variables. You've got square, horizontal, vertical, size, color, border weight, border color. And by the way, those are all really well named variables. If you think about it, they're all following the pattern of using lowercase to start with and just capitalizing as needed when there's another word introduced. They're all really logical names, which would be really useful later. Like if you just name things like SS, who would remember what it is later? But square size, just very self-explanatory. And also these variable names are not using anything like spaces. They don't start with a number. They don't have any symbols in it, and that's really important. So you're going to create a bunch of variables, and one little reminder is that when you're working with color, that you may want to work with strings. So for example, if you're specifying red, yellow, just as named colors, you do need to put quotes around them in your value. Just kind of reminding you about data types and syntax here. If it's just a number you're using, maybe like the size of a square, then just a raw number is appropriate for the argument, and you don't need any quotes in that instance. And what you're going to do is create a square, and you're going to be using the variables. So there's not too much down here yet. It's just giving you the initial starting code you typically start with in a new sketch. There's already a canvas in setup code block, setting up 400 by 400 pixel canvas. There is a background, just has a gray tone in it. And the instruction down here tells you to create a square. So one reminder is to put your variables prior to all the code blocks so that they're available for use when you're ready to add them into things like the square. And then I want to give you one reminder as you're working on this, sort of a hint that you should use the reference as much as you need to in P5. Like just for example, maybe you're looking at the instructions and thinking about where are all these variable names going to go as arguments. I kind of remember Square had three variables. That's funny. I'm getting my words mixed up. That Square has three arguments that can go inside the parentheses here, three values. But we have quite a few more things we want to specify, like color, border, weight. So part of this is to remember the syntax and the different functions that you've been using. Think back to last week when you created shapes, applied color. So just an example, I remember using the fill function to specify color. So maybe one line of code that could be added before adding square could be fill. And that's probably a good place for square color variable name to drop in. But if you don't remember something like how do you specify stroke weights or stroke color, just use the reference. I think last week I didn't really want to have any border colors, so I think I used no stroke, if I remember right. But just want to get in the habit where you just go ahead and look up the reference page, and you can find things like, if you didn't remember, I think just reviewing color might help refresh memory on things like fill could be used. And we also have things down here like stroke is a good function for stroke color, basically your border color. And you can always click that too and get more information, any of these. And then you have things like stroke weight that could be specified as a separate function. So the big reminder there is use the reference, and that you kind of need to remember which functions to use that are appropriate for the various parameters. Let's look at the finished solution. I love color, by the way, so I try to have fun with mine. And right in this section, I'm creating and defining the variables, and then initializing each one with a value. So basically I used the let keyword for each of mine. That's telling it that we're about to create or define a variable. You can see that I have all the variable names, and then equals followed by a value is initializing them by giving it a value. That's where you also want to keep thinking, are you using numbers, or are you working with a different type of data that needs different syntax? So since I used red and magenta as named colors, those are considered strings. I did have to put the quote marks around those. All the others are just simply numbers that are being interpreted as raw values, so they don't need quotes on my other values. I decided, by the way, to make a really thick border. Just gonna have fun with color. And I also changed the background color. As an aside, it was gray initially, but I decided to put in RGB values right down here on line 37. That's where background was specified earlier. So I have 250 for red, 180 for green, 0 for blue. That's creating a yellow background. So you can also choose a color if you like for that. And then below that, you can see I used 4 functions. Fill, and that's where I've applied square color, my variable name. And the big reminder here is I am just placing the variable names wherever I would want the value to be used. So in each argument, I'm dropping in appropriate variable names. I used a stroke function for stroke color. Stroke weight is where I'm specifying the border thickness. And square, right there, is creating the object, and it has 3 arguments. So it is horizontal position, vertical position, and the third one is the size. So in all those cases, I've placed the variable name in there, and then it's understanding to use the value. What I found helpful too is to go ahead and set this up, define those variables as you create them, and then experiment. Once you have the functions and it's visible, you've hit run, then you may want to go up and fiddle with things. Like I think initially I had a much thinner border weight, and it was just fun to experiment. So I just started trying different things, and I think that will help you understand the code better, remember it better too, if you play with it a little bit more. And there you go. So it's a lot of variables, lots of good practice on that exercise.